Chapter 1. Hey there, sleepyheads. Tonight we tumble down crooked cobblestone alleys, dodge suspicious glances in candlelit taverns, and breathe in the yeasty smoke of oven fires that haven't had fresh bread in weeks. We're slipping into the crackling tension of pre-revolutionary France, just before it all unravels. The streets are tight, the ceiling's low, and the monarchy, higher than ever, on powdered wigs, silk shoes, and a wildly misplaced sense of security. You are waking up in Paris. It's summer, 1788. You stretch on your straw mattress and smack your head on the underside of the slanted roof. Pigeons flutter above your garret, cooing like they know something's about to go terribly wrong. You live in the 11th arrondissement, though no one's calling it that yet. Your room smells like candle wax, sour wine, and desperation. You've got no toilet, but hey, you do have a chamber pot you empty directly into the street. Paris smells exactly like you'd imagine. Outside, the air tastes like soot. Bells toll from Notre Dame, but they don't calm your nerves. Something's coming. You can feel it in your knees, though maybe that's just malnutrition. The economy's crumbling. The harvest failed last year. Wheat is scarce. Bread prices have doubled, then tripled. You haven't seen a full baguette in weeks, only stubby little heels of crust, hard enough to chip a tooth on. You chew anyway. It's either that or boiled shoe leather. Across town, nobles are eating truffles and pheasant under crystal chandeliers. You're lucky to gnaw a turnip in peace. At Versailles, King Louis XVI is trying to manage the financial crisis, like a man reading Latin with his eyes closed. Meanwhile, Marie Antoinette's hairstyle costs more than your yearly rent. She has swans imported, just to float in her private pond. You've never even seen a swan. You're not sure they're real. The people are getting louder. Something about liberté, égalité, and we're starving, you powdered pelicans. Pamphlets are floating through town, thousands of them. Smuggled in baskets, slipped under tavern doors, handed out by whispering teenagers who want you to join a secret club. Some are written by this guy named Robespierre. He wears round glasses and talks about virtue a lot. Then there's Danton, loud, sweaty, charming in the way drunks can be, and surprisingly dangerous for someone who rarely combs his hair. You work a menial job, maybe hauling barrels at the port or weaving cloth in a cramped attic shop. It doesn't really matter. You're part of the Third Estate, and that's a fancy way of saying not a noble or a priest, so basically expendable. You pay taxes, more than the nobles. You pay tithes to the church. You pay bribes to the guard who turns a blind eye when you sleep in the alley behind the bakers. And what do you get for all this? A backache, and maybe, if you're lucky, a thin soup with cabbage. And yet, you feel the hum. It's electric. Paris is alive with it. There are too many people in the streets, too many arguments in wine-stained cafes, too many eyes darting over shoulders when someone starts whispering about reform. You don't know exactly what reform means, but you're pretty sure it involves less starvation and fewer taxes. Maybe a break from the constant boot of the monarchy, pressing down on your hope. Of course, this is all dangerous thinking, treasonous even. The king has spies. His police have informants. You keep your voice low when you talk about change, because someone's always listening. That weird guy at the next table? He's not just nursing cheap wine, he's memorizing your face. Historians still argue whether the revolution really began with hunger or ideas or sheer chance. But you're not a historian. You're just trying not to die of either starvation or suspicion. And on one particularly hot July day, everything tips. Word spreads. The Estates General is called. It's the first time in 175 years the king has summoned it. Which is like your dad asking how the dishwasher works, ominous and out of character. It's supposed to be about solving the money crisis, but let's be real, it's already spiraling into something else. The Third Estate, the people, declare themselves the National Assembly. You hear this shouted in the street by a breathless teenager who smells like cheese, and revolution. Suddenly, pamphlets turn into banners, whispers become speeches, and you're pulled into a crowd like driftwood in a flood. One day, you're just a tired peasant with splinters in your fingers. The next, you're swept up in something enormous. You hear talk of a constitution, a new order, a society where all men are equal. You almost laugh. Equal? You? With the Duke who spit on you last week? But people around you are nodding like it's not the most ridiculous thing they've ever heard. There's a tingle of hope. The idea that your children, if you manage to survive long enough to have any, might grow up in a France without tyranny. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You're still sleeping on straw, remember? One morning, you step outside and notice every shop window has a tiny paper stuck to the glass. It's a list. Names, people to watch, enemies of the revolution. You're not on it, but your neighbor is. Old Bernard, the woodcutter, who once called the king a butter-smeared coward after too much wine. He's gone by nightfall. No one talks about him the next day, just like that. And you? You start looking over your shoulder a little more. You keep your mouth shut in public. You no longer speak, unless spoken to. Even your dreams seem quieter now. Meanwhile, in Versailles, the king is panicking in his silk pajamas. He calls in troops. Paris doesn't like that. Not one bit. The people want the king to listen. He responds by lining streets with soldiers. So the people get angry, then hungrier, and angry and hungry people. That's basically the recipe for guillotines. And you, poor soul, are living smack in the middle of it all. No privilege, no protection. Just your breath, your instincts, and your increasingly worn-out boots. By now, you're having dreams of a better world, but waking up to reality where that dream can get you killed. You consider fleeing the city, but there's no money, no work outside the walls. And besides, deep down, you want to see what happens next. You want to believe that maybe, just maybe, this will work. Spoiler alert, it won't. Remember that line from earlier? You probably won't survive this. Yeah, you're starting to believe it. So before you get too cozy under that blanket, do me a favor. If you enjoy these stories, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Only if it feels right, no pressure. And drop a comment with your city and what time it is where you're listening. I love seeing how far this sleepy little rebellion reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The streets of Paris are humming, and you're about to walk straight into the storm. Chapter 2. So here's the bad news, you're a peasant. You probably suspected it, when your roof leaked every time it rained, or when your dinner consisted of half a turnip and a stale crust of bread. But now it's official. You're part of the great, overworked, underfed mass of humanity that makes up France's third estate, which is really just a polite way of saying everyone who does all the work and gets none of the benefits. You don't own land. You don't collect taxes. You pay them. It's early morning again, and your calluses throb before your feet even hit the floor. The thin mattress beneath you creaks in protest, and you wince at the stiffness in your back. You slept in your clothes because your only other shirt is drying by the hearth. If a guest showed up right now, you'd have to entertain them half naked. Not that anyone's visiting. Outside, the chickens are already pecking at the mud near your doorstep, and someone down the road is shouting about the grain shortage. Again. It's not even sunrise, and the whole village is already cranky. You trudge down to the communal oven, hoping for a scrap of fresh bread. No luck. You're sent away with yesterday's ash, and a sympathetic shrug. The baker's daughter gives you a little smile, though. She's missing 2 teeth, but hey, in this economy, that's practically a flirtation. The taxes this year were brutal. You paid to the crown. You paid to the local noble, who hasn't visited your town in 3 years, but still sends his steward to collect. You paid the tithe to the church, of course, and that's the one you don't dare skip. Word is, God doesn't care if your harvest was bad. You're not just poor, you're trapped. The cost of living is going up, but your pay, frozen in place. You used to trade a few eggs for flour. Now it's 3 eggs for a handful of grain, and you have to slip an extra egg under the table to avoid a fine. And don't even think about hunting. The forests are owned by the nobility. That rabbit hopping along the edge of your field belongs to some Marquis who drinks Bordeaux and names his horses after ancient gods. If you so much as throw a rock at it, you could end up whipped or worse. But still, life trudges on. You fix your roof with twine and prayer. You patch your breeches for the 5th time. And you mutter to yourself as you pass the manor house at the edge of town, where tall iron gates keep the nobility's dogs in and you out. Now and then, a carriage passes through town. Gold trim, polished wood. Windows too clean to belong here. Inside, perfumed aristocrats, fanning themselves and laughing, as if famine is a joke they're in on. You try not to look. They're not even pretending to hide their wealth anymore. Why should they? And here's the thing, you're not stupid. You know what's happening. Everyone does. But saying it aloud is dangerous. You've heard about peasants being arrested for less. The local watch is loyal to the crown and to coin. You keep your grumbling quiet, shared only with neighbors you trust, behind shutters, over watery soup. Quirky side note, some people have started wearing red, white, and blue cockades on their hats. Not the rich, obviously. These are the rebels, the loud ones, the ones who say things like natural rights and sovereignty of the people with a straight face. The cockade is a symbol now, a tiny, colorful threat to the old order. You haven't worn one yet, but you've thought about it. By now, the Estates General has met, and people are starting to understand just how rigged the game really is. The first estate, the clergy. The second estate, the nobility. They can always outvote the third. Two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. Guess which one you are when the third estate breaks away and forms the National Assembly. Your local tavern can't stop talking about it. The bartender nearly drops his wine cask when someone mentions it. A tailor from Paris, passing through town, says it's the beginning of the end for the monarchy. He says it like it's good news. Historians still argue whether the peasantry truly understood the political mechanics or were just riding the waves of change. But it doesn't really matter. You're swept up in it now. One evening, a neighbor slips you a pamphlet. The ink is still fresh. It's called What is the Third Estate? By a guy named Abbé Sieyès. You can't read all of it. Some of the big words make your head hurt. But the message is clear enough. You are everything. You do everything. And yet, you are nothing. It's weirdly comforting. You stay up late that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the mice in the rafters, and thinking about those words. Everything. Nothing. It loops in your mind like a prayer. Then comes the news. The king tried to lock the National Assembly out of their meeting hall. They broke into a tennis court and swore an oath instead. You don't even know what a tennis court is, but people are excited. They call it brave, defiant, historic, and suddenly you feel something crack open in your chest. It's not hunger or fear this time, it's something like possibility. A few days later, you gather with others in the village square. A cobbler reads aloud from a declaration someone copied by hand. It talks about liberty, equality, fraternity. It sounds too clean, too pretty to be real. But you listen anyway. Someone says the people of Paris are forming militias, armed ones, that they're demanding weapons from the armories, that they're eyeing the Bastille, and then it hits you. This isn't just talk anymore. This isn't just some nobles bickering in powdered wigs. This is a crack in the ceiling of the world you live under, and maybe, just maybe, you could squeeze through. You go to bed that night, more alert than usual. There's shouting in the distance, dogs barking, a bell ringing, out of rhythm. You lie in the dark, heart pounding. You think about bread, about taxes, about rabbits you're not allowed to hunt, about kings you'll never meet, and laws that treat you like furniture. You think about that cockade, and for the first time, you wonder what it would feel like to wear one, to say, yes, I am everything, I do everything, and I deserve more than this. But then you remember, people die for saying less. Sleep doesn't come easy. You probably won't survive this. Chapter 3. You wake to noise, not the usual morning chickens or the blacksmith's hammer clanging down the street. This is louder, thicker, a strange electric roar. It's July 14, 1789. The sky's already too bright, too hot, and the air clings to your skin like it's warning you, don't trust this day. Outside your door, people aren't walking. They're moving like a current, fast, determined, chanting. Someone bumps into you and shouts, to the Bastille, as if that explains everything. And honestly, it does. The Bastille, that grim fortress just east of the Seine. Heavy stone walls, 8 towers, and enough dread to fill the entire city. No one you know has ever been inside it, but you've all heard the stories. Torture, chains, prisoners who vanish without trial. It's where the king sends people he doesn't feel like formally accusing of anything. Just drop them in a cell and throw away the key. And today, apparently, the people are done with that. You follow the crowd, not because you're brave, but because you don't want to be left behind. The streets swell with bodies, sweat, and shouted slogans. A drunk man stumbles past yelling freedom for all, which sounds noble, until he trips on a cur and vomits into a bucket. You pass a bakery with its windows smashed in. No one seems to care. A group of teenagers, no older than 16, march by holding wooden poles like bayonets. They're not soldiers. They're not even sure how to hold the poles, but their faces are set like stone. As you reach the Eastern District, the noise sharpens. People are arguing, waving arms, stacking barrels like makeshift barricades. Someone offers you a musket. You hesitate. You've never held one before. It smells like old grease and ash. The barrel's too long, the wood is chipped. You take it anyway. Quirky tidbit. This musket probably doesn't even work. Half the weapons handed out today are relics, more intimidating than functional, but nobody seems to care. The power isn't in the gun, it's in the numbers. Then you see it. The Bastille. And it's even uglier than you imagine. It looms, black and brutal, against the bright sky. The gate is closed, the drawbridge up. A few guards pace the ramparts. They look down at you like you're ants. Angry ants with questionable hygiene and very loud opinions. Historians still argue whether the Bastille was a real threat or more of a symbol. At this point, it only holds 7 prisoners, one of them a forger, another mentally ill. But symbols matter. This place means oppression, fear, the silence of the forgotten. So, naturally, someone starts shouting. A delegation is sent inside to negotiate. You and the rest of the crowd stand sweating, shifting, fidgeting with your weapons. Hours crawl by. Then, a gunshot. No one knows who fired first. The guards? The crowd? A clumsy musket misfire? It doesn't matter. Pandemonium. You duck behind a barrel as shots crack the air. A cannon thunders. People scream. The man beside you catches a ball in a lay and collapses, howling. Blood spatters your sleeve. You didn't sign up for this, did you? But now you're here, and you're armed. And running would mean getting shot in the back, or worse, called a coward. So you stay. You fire blindly. The musket jumps in your hands like a startled cat. It kicks your shoulder and leaves your ears ringing. You have no idea if you hit anything. You reload, clumsily, slowly, praying you remember the powder and ball in the right order. At some point, a group breaks off to haul carts of gunpowder from the Hotel des Invalides. Others dig trenches, drag up ladders, try to scale the stone like drunken acrobats. Hours pass. Smoke hangs in the air like an oily veil. A young woman runs by holding a frying pan like a weapon. You blink. Maybe you're hallucinating. And then, the gates fall. The guards surrender. The Bastille is yours. The crowd rushes in, not to free prisoners, ironically. You all seem slightly disappointed there are so few. But to grab weapons, destroy papers, and most importantly, prove the king is no longer untouchable. And here's the kicker. You, a starving peasant with dirt under your nails and a half-functional musket, just helped take down one of the most feared symbols in France. Someone grabs the governor of the Bastille, Delaunay. He's dragged outside, beaten, and well, let's just say it doesn't end politely. His head ends up on a pike, paraded through the city like a grotesque balloon. You don't cheer exactly, but you don't look away either. By nightfall, you stumble back home, exhausted, shaken, sticky with sweat and soot and someone else's blood. You didn't die today, but you could have. The city smells different, not better, just changed. Something deep and irreversible has broken. The fear that used to hang in the air like perfume, it's dissipating, replaced by something sharper, more unpredictable. You don't sleep well. Your hands keep twitching, your ears still ring from the cannon. But somewhere, deep inside, there's this tiny flickering thing. Hope? Maybe, or maybe adrenaline. Either way, the revolution is no longer an idea. It's real, and it's here. And you've just helped light the match. Word spreads quickly. By morning, the newspapers are calling it a triumph of the people. People like you. The king? He pretends to be fine with it. Wears a tricolor cockade the next day like he's been on your side this whole time. You almost laugh. Almost. But you know better. Things are only just beginning. And you're officially a revolutionary now. Which, if we're being honest, makes your chances of survival even worse. Chapter 4. You're still sore from the Bastille. Your shoulder aches from the musket kick, your ears throb from cannon blasts, and your legs feel like they were individually stomped by a herd of angry goats. But somehow you're back on the streets of Paris again, because the revolution doesn't come with sick days. The city's changed overnight. You notice it in the tension. taut, like a violin string just a breath away from snapping. Windows are plastered with bold pamphlets and chalky slogans. Children are wearing cockades now, even though half of them probably think it's just a fun new hat trend. But you wear yours for real. You've started standing taller. You say citizen instead of monsieur now, and if someone corrects you, you just raise an eyebrow and say nothing. It's a small rebellion, but these days, small rebellions stack up fast. Still, for all the energy on the streets, there's this new silence too, an absence. The kind that comes after a door slams shut on history. The Bastille's gone, like really gone. People have started pulling it apart brick by brick. Souvenir hunters, revolutionaries, opportunists. Some are even selling pieces of the old fortress as keepsakes. Want a chunk of tyranny for your mantle? Only 10 sous. Quirky fact? There's a guy named Pierre-Francois Palloy, an early entrepreneur of the revolution, who actually starts turning the rubble into commemorative medals. You know, to remember the moment the people took back power, and also to turn a tidy little profit. Capitalism, revolutionary edition. But the fall of the Bastille wasn't just a demolition. It was a warning shot. Now the king is rattled. Nobles are packing their wigs and fleeing the country, whispering something about returning when things settle down. Spoiler alert, they're going to be gone a long time. And in the capital, the temperature rises. You go to a meeting in your neighborhood, just a few citizens in a wine cellar that smells like mildew and old grapes. They talk about forming a militia, a real one, with uniforms and ranks and mustering drills. It's awkward at first. Half the men have never held anything heavier than a shovel. But you're learning, fast. Meanwhile, the assembly is still talking politics, but you and your neighbors, you're organizing, patrolling, preparing, because people are scared. Of food shortages, of noble retaliation, of foreign armies that might invade to restore order. You don't trust anyone anymore, not the king, not the nobles, not even your local baker, whose prices have mysteriously doubled. Then the rumors start. Grain hoarders, nobles plotting to poison the wells, foreign troops amassing at the borders. You can't go a day without someone whispering about betrayal or sabotage. Fear is everywhere, and with fear comes rage. One afternoon, you're in line for bread again, and someone pushes forward, claiming their child is sick. You let them pass, but someone else doesn't. Shouting starts, then fists. Then, somehow, the bread cart tips over, and the crowd turns into a snarling pile of elbows, curses, and desperation. You leave without any bread. But you gain a bloody nose and a renewed understanding that this revolution, it's not going to be pretty. And then, the king sends troops. Just a few regiments, just outside Paris. Just for safety, they say. But you know what it looks like. Intimidation. And guess what? The people of Paris don't respond well to intimidation. Next thing you know, the National Assembly officially recognizes the National Guard, that scrappy, citizen-formed militia you've been practicing with. General Lafayette, yes, that Lafayette, the American Revolution guy, is appointed commander. You're handed a proper weapon now, the kind that might actually fire without falling apart. You're given a blue uniform, ill-fitting and itchy, but still. There's a strange sense of pride in it. You're no longer just a poor weaver or dockhand or stable boy. You're a soldier of the people, but don't get too proud. Because back in Versailles, Marie Antoinette is throwing a party. That's right. While Paris simmers with hunger and hope and the occasional street brawl, the royal family is hosting lavish banquets. The troops stationed near the palace are treated to wine, music, and oaths of loyalty. There are rumors of people trampling on the tricolor cockade. It's not just an insult, it's a declaration of war. Not official, not yet, but something has snapped. Word spreads, always does, and when the women of Paris hear about it, something inside them snaps too. It starts with market women, strong, loud, practical women who know how to haggle and how to fight. They've had enough. No bread? Fine. They'll walk to Versailles and ask the queen why her cake tastes better than Parisian dust. And you? You get caught in the tide, literally. A tide of women, children, and a few confused men swept along the road to Versailles like human floodwater. Rain falls in heavy sheets. Mud cakes your boots. You've never walked this far in your life, and now you're doing it with an aching back, a musket slung over your shoulder, and the knowledge that you're heading straight toward a palace guarded by real soldiers. Still, the mood is charged. The crowd sings, chants, beats drums made from pots. One woman holds a fish wrapped in revolutionary slogans. You don't ask why. You've learned not to ask. By the time you reach Versailles, it's chaos. Demands are shouted. Barricades are formed. Tension coils in the air like a spring waiting to snap. Somehow, miraculously, the king agrees to meet and to move. He promises to return to Paris with the people. The crowd cheers, but not everyone trusts him. The next morning, while most are still sleeping on the cold stone outside the palace, shots are fired. No one knows who started it, but the crowd storms the palace gates. You follow, heart hammering, unsure if you're brave or just too scared to run. Inside, it's a maze of gold, mirrors, and luxury you can barely comprehend. The Hall of Mirrors is like stepping into another universe, one where ceilings have frescoes and floors never squeak. You think about how many loaves of bread it costs to make one of those chandeliers. The royal family is found, cornered. They're not harmed, not yet, but they're brought outside, trembling, forced into carriages. And you're part of the crowd that escorts them back to Paris. It's a strange parade, royalty surrounded by peasants, muskets raised, drums beating slow and steady. You chant as you walk, a chorus of triumph and mourning. You return home soaked, sore, and changed. The king is no longer in Versailles. He's here now, with you, under the watchful eye of the people. The revolution isn't over, but it has teeth now, and for better or worse, you're riding on its back. Chapter 5. You'd think dragging the royal family from their golden palace to a cramped Parisian residence would be enough to settle the score for a while. You'd be wrong. The king is now in the Tuileries Palace, guarded by the very citizens who once bowed to him. He can't sneeze without someone writing it down, misinterpreting it, and turning it into a pamphlet titled The Crown's Secret Plans to Infect the People. You pass the palace sometimes, peering through the iron gates with a mix of fascination and suspicion. There's Louis XVI, the man who once reigned over you like a distant storm cloud, now reduced to a grumpy, sluggish prisoner in silk breeches, surrounded by guards who don't particularly like him. But things are getting weird. The assembly's still churning out new laws. Everyone's obsessed with writing a constitution. You hear people toss around phrases like unalienable rights and popular sovereignty as casually as gossip about the baker's niece. You try to follow along, but honestly, half of it sounds like legal soup. You're just here for the part where you maybe, hopefully, don't die hungry. Still, something's different. You feel it on the streets. There's more shouting, less laughing. Food lines stretch longer, and now they're flanked by pamphleteers with bugged-out eyes yelling about tyranny and foreign conspiracies. You grab your bread and walk faster. One night at a local meeting, a man named Jean-Paul Marat shows up. He's pale and tense, and always looks like he's about 2 minutes away from bursting a blood vessel. He publishes a paper called L'Ami du People, the friend of the people, which basically means professional instigator. He calls for purges. He wants heads. You listen wide-eyed, unsure if he's brilliant or unhinged, possibly both. Quirky detail. Marat writes many of his articles from a medicinal bath. He has a skin condition and spends hours soaking while scribbling furious manifestos. A man shouting for blood while marinating like a revolutionary soup. That's the revolution for you, equal parts tragedy and theater. Marat isn't the only one stirring the pot. Robespierre's rising now too, still soft-spoken, still fanatical about virtue, but gaining traction. He talks like a lawyer and dreams like a purist. You don't quite trust him, but the way people nod when he speaks, it's hypnotic. And then, the royals try to run. It's June 1791, and the king and queen, tired of their golden prison, dress like servants and sneak out in the middle of the night. You don't hear about it until morning, when the entire city erupts like a dropped wine cask. The news spreads like fire. The king tried to abandon the people. He made it pretty far too, almost to the border, before someone recognized his pudgy face on a coin. Awkward, he was dragged back to Paris in shame, the royal family seated in a dusty carriage while onlookers spat, shouted, and held up signs reading, "Who is your king now?" You're there when they return. The silence is heavier than any scream. Nobody cheers. Nobody throws flowers. Just a sea of cold, hard stares. The trust, what little of it remained, is gone. Historians still argue whether the king's attempted escape sealed his fate, or if he could have salvaged something had he just stayed put. But for you and your neighbors, that was it. The mask fell. Louis wasn't some well-meaning buffoon. He was a traitor. From that moment, everything speeds up. The assembly forces the king to accept the constitutional monarchy, a sort of political leash. He agrees, publicly, but you can tell he's seething behind his tired, blinking eyes. Marie Antoinette barely hides her contempt anymore. She scowls from palace windows like she's already writing a memoir titled I Hate This City and Everyone in It. Meanwhile, people are forming clubs, political ones. You join the Jacobins, mostly because your neighbor invites you and they offer free wine at meetings. It starts out friendly, debates, speeches, hopeful plans for a new France. But soon it gets sharper. You notice the Durandins across the room, more moderate, more polished. They talk about compromise, about working with the king. You don't trust them, neither do your new friends. The Jacobins want more than a leash on the monarchy. They want the head removed from the dog entirely. The streets feel more dangerous now. People vanish after saying the wrong thing. Neighbors you once shared wine with suddenly won't meet your eye. Spies are everywhere, or maybe paranoia just smells a lot like truth these days. You carry your musket more often, not because you're planning anything, but because everyone else is. One day you hear news from the countryside. Peasants burning manor houses, dragging noble records into the street, setting fire to years of oppression. They call it the Great Fear. You're torn, part of you cheers, but part of you wonders how long it'll be before someone sets your home on fire, mistaking your borrowed coat for privilege. Back in Paris, tensions bubble. A crowd gathers on the Champ de Mars to sign a petition demanding the king's abdication. You're not sure what'll happen. Maybe a protest, maybe a speech. Instead, the National Guard opens fire. Dozens die. Blood on the grass. Screams, smoke, chaos. You don't sleep that night. You lie in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what you're a part of. A revolution? A civil war? A moral panic dressed in patriotism? The lines blur more each day. One thing's for certain now, you're either all in or you're a traitor. No middle ground, no more compromise. You've picked your side. And the revolution? She's just getting started. Chapter 6. You wake to bells. Not church bells, alarm bells. They ring out from towers and rooftops, a shrill metallic panic that slices through sleep like a guillotine through silk. You stumble outside, boots half-laced, heart already racing. The streets are boiling. People shout, wave arms, climb onto carts and barrels like prophets. The Austrians are coming, and the Prussians. And they're not here to sightsee. No one's really surprised. Ever since the king tried to flee, Europe's been watching the revolution like a nervous cat watches a bonfire. Monarchs don't like it when other monarchs get their heads questioned. It makes everyone's throne feel a little wobbly. So now they're sending armies. They call it the First Coalition, a big international, please stop scaring the aristocracy party. They claim they want to restore order to France, but you know better. Order smells a lot like gallows and noble boots on peasant necks. The government in Paris panics. Suddenly, the king is no longer just a disappointing figurehead. He's a possible traitor in the very heart of your revolution. He's Austrian by marriage, after all. His wife, Marie Antoinette, was born in Vienna. Half the country already calls her L'Autrichienne, and the joke's not subtle. At your neighborhood assembly, everyone is tense. One woman stands up and says flatly, "If Paris falls, we hang." Nobody laughs. You spend your days in drills now. The National Guard tightens formation, your musket no longer ceremonial. You're taught how to fix a bayonet, how to reload while running, how to shoot a man and keep walking. Because here's the truth, the revolution has reached the point where speeches are nice, but bullets are better. Meanwhile, across the river, the sans-culottes are taking over. You're technically one of them, though you didn't get a say in the title. It literally means without knee breeches, referring to how you wear trousers instead of the aristocratic silk shorts. Somehow, clothing became politics. That tracks. The sans-culottes aren't interested in polite reform. They want justice. Swift, uncompromising, sometimes improvised. They fill the streets with chants, red liberty caps, and the smell of unwashed defiance. You march with them. You're swept up in the sound, the pressure, the raw heat of bodies packed shoulder to shoulder. A man beside you shouts, "Down with the tyrant," and you echo him before you even think. The target, of course, is the king. By August 1792, something breaks. The people, your people, storm the Tuileries Palace. Again, this time, it's not a protest. It's war. You're there. The crowd is massive, armed with muskets, axes, kitchen knives, screaming, driven. You can't see the king, but you see the guards. The Swiss Guard, tall and stoic in red uniforms, forming ranks. Then you hear the shots. The battle is short and brutal. Gunpowder thickens the air until you cough blood into your sleeve. Smoke swallows everything. The palace becomes a tomb. Bodies litter the marble stairs. You step over one, nearly trip on another. The king and his family are taken into custody again, but this time, it's different. There's no going back to any illusion of monarchy. Quirky detail: after the battle, people walk around with bits of the palace curtains and silverware like it's a flea market. You see a boy wearing one of Marie Antoinette's gloves as a hat. Fashion is fluid now. The monarchy is suspended. France is declared a republic. It feels unreal, like you blinked and someone rewrote the rules of the universe. You keep expecting a correction, a scroll from the heavens that says, "Just kidding, put the king back." But instead you get war. France needs soldiers, volunteers, cannon fodder. You're handed a uniform, still itchy, and a ration pack that consists of half-burnt bread and dried beans. You sleep in barns, march in mud, and try not to think about the fact that the people shooting at you have better boots. The French Revolutionary Army is a mess, barely trained, poorly equipped, but it's full of people who believe, who shout slogans while reloading, who risk dysentery and death because they think, maybe they can build something better. Meanwhile, inside Paris, things go very dark. The September massacres begin. You're not there for the first night. You hear about it after patrol, whispers in the street, blood on the cobblestones. Mobs break into prisons, dragging out priests, nobles, anyone vaguely counter-revolutionary. Trials last minutes. Heads roll faster than verdicts. You ask a friend if it's true. He just nods, pale and quiet. The next night you go with him, just to watch, just to see. You wish you hadn't. The prison gates are wide open. Inside, a woman sobs over a severed hand. A young man, no older than 17, laughs as he wipes a blade clean on his sleeve. You recognize one of the victims, a local tax clerk. Not a good man, but not this. And yet, you stay. You don't join in, but you don't stop it either. Historians still argue whether the massacres were organized or spontaneous, whether they were justice or panic. But in that moment, standing in blood-soaked straw, you stop being a bystander. You're complicit, just by being there. Afterward, you try to sleep, but your dreams are full of screams. You go to the National Convention the next week hoping for some sense of stability. Instead, you get shouting matches, political knife fights, and a growing push to put the king on trial. And you know how that ends. The arguments aren't about whether Louis is guilty, just whether he should live. Robespierre says, "A king must die so that the republic may live." You hear that quote on the street, in taverns, on the lips of your comrades. You find yourself repeating it without realizing. It rolls off your tongue too easily. In January 1793, you're part of the crowd that watches him die. They built the guillotine in the center of Paris, Place de la Révolution. You stand on tiptoe, craning your neck as the king is brought forward. He's dressed in a simple coat, no wig. He tries to speak, but the drum roll swallows his voice. Then thud. It's fast, almost polite. The blade hisses down and the world holds its breath. Then the executioner lifts the head high, and the crowd roars. You don't. You're not sure why. Maybe it's shock, or maybe, just maybe, something inside you still believed in mercy. But mercy isn't the mood these days. The Republic is real now. It's bloody, loud, hungry, and utterly unpredictable. And you're still standing. But now you know, survival isn't just about bread and bullets. It's about conscience. And yours is starting to shake. Chapter 7. You're not the same person who watched the king die. Something in you shifted, clicked into place, or maybe cracked. The crowds still roar, the drums still roll, but your feet feel heavier now. Every cheer sounds like it's echoing off a deeper silence inside you. Still, you march. Because what else can you do? The revolution doesn't slow down for feelings. It speeds up actually. You go from battles to tribunals to political executions in the time it takes to finish a cup of thin soup. There's no time to process, no time to mourn. You just keep moving because stopping means thinking, and thinking means guilt. And guilt is dangerous now. It's the spring of 1793. France is at war with basically every monarch in Europe. Austria, Prussia, Great Britain, Spain, the Dutch Republic, they're all sharpening their bayonets and licking their chops. The revolution has gone global, whether it meant to or not. You're back on the front. Mud, hunger, and frostbite are your constant companions. But something's changing in the army. The officers aren't nobles anymore. They're people like you, farmers, laborers, artisans promoted because they're brave or just the last ones alive. You watch as a skinny Corsican artillery officer named Bonaparte shouts orders like he's already emperor of the universe. He's sharp, ambitious, and terrifyingly good at blowing things up. You don't know it yet, but you're witnessing the rise of a man who will one day rewire Europe and rewrite the revolution's ending. But that's later. Right now, Paris is burning with paranoia. Back home, the revolution starts turning inward. The guillotine doesn't rest after the king, it just gets faster. The Republic forms the Committee of Public Safety. And it sounds nice, doesn't it? Public safety, like something you'd see on a street sign near a firehouse. But in practice, it's a guillotine in committee form. Robespierre is at the center of it. Soft voice, cold eyes. He used to seem harmless, idealistic. A man who thought too much. Now he speaks like fate itself. Talks about virtue and terror in the same breath, like they're twin siblings. And you nod along, because what's the alternative? Danton tries to slow things down. He's bold, loud, rough around the edges, but he sees the danger. He says the terror is eating the revolution. He warns Robespierre that fire, once lit, doesn't choose where to spread. Robespierre smiles and says nothing. Soon after, Danton's head rolls. That's when it hits you. No one is safe now. Not the king, not the nobles, not even the men who started this thing. Historians still argue whether the reign of terror was necessary, whether it preserved the Republic or destroyed its soul. But you're not a historian, you're a survivor, and survival has its own logic. You start watching your words more closely. Stop joking at the wine stalls, speak less at meetings. You even consider burning a few pamphlets you once shouted proudly in the streets, just in case, because all it takes is a whisper. A neighbor reports you for hoarding bread, guillotine. A former friend misquotes you at a club, guillotine. You forget to say citizen before someone's name. Not a crime, but suspicious. And suspicious is enough. You wake each morning listening for the knock at the door. You keep your boots by your bed, just in case you need to run. You start dreaming in slogans, liberty, equality, fraternity, guillotine. The executions become routine. You stop counting. The crowds still gather, some morbidly entertained, others pretending not to enjoy it. A few openly cheer, you don't. But you're still there, because leaving would make you visible. One day you recognize someone on the scaffold, a baker who once gave you an extra loaf. She stands proud, doesn't flinch. The blade falls. You flinch for her. That night, you drink too much. You try to forget her face. You don't succeed. Quirky tidbit: the guillotine wasn't just efficient. It was a cultural icon. Kids played with toy guillotines. People toasted each other to the machine. You once saw a street vendor selling pastries shaped like severed heads. Honestly, they weren't bad. But it's not funny anymore. Not when the revolution starts devouring its own. Camille Desmoulins? Gone. The Girondins? Gone. Robespierre starts seeing enemies in every shadow. And yet, people still adore him. His portraits hang in homes like he's some saint of the New Order. You wonder if they'd still love him if they saw him behind closed doors, sleepless, twitching, whispering about purity and the general will, like a prophet trapped in his own gospel. You start to avoid the square, the place where the guillotine lies. You tell yourself it's too far, or too crowded, or that you're busy. But the truth is, you can't bear the sound anymore. The hush before the blade, the cheer after. You wonder if you've become a coward. You used to think bravery was standing up to the king. Now it might be keeping your head down, literally. You're not alone. You see it in others. That quiet desperation. That hunger not just for food, but for peace. For silence, for normal. But normal is gone, has been for a while. And then, something cracks. It's July 1794. Robespierre gives a strange, rambling speech at the convention. Talks about unnamed traitors, about secret enemies of the Republic. People squirm in their seats. No one likes being accused in riddles. The next day, he tries to speak again. They don't let him. There's shouting. A struggle. Some say he tries to shoot himself. The bullet shatters his jaw. Others say a soldier did it. Historians still argue about that too. You hear the news while eating a stale heel of bread. Robespierre is arrested. You barely have time to react before the next day he is at the scaffold. His face is bandaged, jaw dangling. He tries to scream something, but all that comes out is a wet, broken rasp. The crowd, your crowd, cheers louder than they did for the king. And just like that, the terror ends. Not with a rebellion, not with a vote, just one blade and a silence afterward that feels almost holy. You walk home in shock. It's over, or at least this part is. But you're still here, barely. And you've stopped wondering if you'll survive the revolution. Now you wonder if it'll survive you. Chapter 8. You breathe easier after Robespierre falls. Not a lot easier, just enough to unclench your jaw, to stop waking up every night expecting boots outside your door. The guillotine doesn't vanish, but it gets quieter, less enthusiastic. You can walk past it without hearing the crowd chant like they're at a blood-soaked opera. Paris is exhausted. You feel it in the market stalls, where vegetables are back, but conversation is thin. In the clubs, where revolutionary speeches are shorter and wine cups get filled a little more generously. The people want peace now, not the kind declared on a parchment, but the kind you feel in your spine. The ability to sit, to rest, to not flinch at every creak of a floorboard. You try to believe it's coming, but beneath the calm is something else. A cold aftershock. Because what do you do after surviving a storm that killed your king, your enemies, your friends, and half your ideals? You rebuild, or at least pretend to. The new government calls itself the Directory. 5 men, elected, accountable, in theory. They dress well, talk smooth, and hold power like it's a glass of expensive wine they're terrified to spill. You watch them from a distance, arms crossed, heart guarded. They don't look like you. They look like a compromise. But you're too tired to care. Most days you're more focused on your next meal than on the next election. You've traded slogans for silence, hope for habit. Yet even now, the revolution isn't done with you. The economy's in shambles. Inflation spikes. You buy a loaf of bread with a pocket full of paper, then walk home wondering whether to eat it or trade it for firewood. People riot again, but it's different now, less political, more desperate, less chance of liberty, and more screams of "we're starving." You see soldiers drag away a mother who threw a rock through a bakery window. Her child clings to her shawl, crying, unnoticed. You give him your crust of bread. It's the first time you felt human in weeks. Back at home, the walls seem thinner. Not literally. They're still drafty and cracked. But emotionally, you feel exposed, haunted by memories, faces, names, regrets. Sometimes you whisper them to yourself before sleep. A quiet roll call of the fallen. You wonder what they think of this republic. One afternoon, you get a letter. It's from a friend, well, a former friend, from the early days of the revolution. He moved to the provinces, disappeared before the terror got loud. He writes about vineyards, quiet mornings, a life that feels foreign to you now. He invites you to visit. You think about it, but something keeps you in Paris. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, or maybe you're waiting for whatever comes next, and something is coming. Because while the Directory squabbles, while politicians toast to stability, there's a name floating on everyone's lips. Bonaparte. He's still young, but already a legend. Corsican. Artillery genius. Victories in Italy that sound like fairy tales. He's not like the powdered generals of the old regime. He moves fast, thinks faster, and smells more like gunpowder than perfume. You first hear about him at a tavern. 2 soldiers talk in hushed tones about his latest campaign. He won the whole thing in a month, one says. He makes the Austrians look like amateurs. You laugh quietly, but later you look him up. A portrait. A speech. A name that keeps ringing in your ears. Then, in 1795, the unrest flares again. Royalists try to seize power in Paris. You're not surprised. They've been licking their wounds for years, waiting. You're barely home before the drums start. This time, though, the response is brutal, precise. Bonaparte, now a general, is given command of the defense. He doesn't hesitate. Cannons are wheeled into the streets. Grape shot tears through the crowd. The insurrection crumbles in a day. It's called the whiff of grape shot. You remember it because it smells like victory, and smoke, and something worse. Finality. People cheer. The streets calm, but you feel it. In your bones. This isn't the revolution anymore. This is something new. Quirky tidbit. Bonaparte's popularity after that skyrockets, not just because he saved the Directory, but because he did it with flair. Artists paint him as a Roman hero, newspapers call him the savior of the Republic, and your neighbor starts humming a tune called The March of Napoleon before dawn every morning. It's catchy, but it gets old fast. You start hearing his name in cafes, then in assemblies. then on the lips of desperate politicians looking for anyone, to keep the Republic from collapsing again. And Bonaparte? He's happy to oblige. In 1798, he invades Egypt. You don't understand why. Most people don't. Something about trade routes and striking at British interests. All you know is that he marches across the desert with more maps than horses, defeats armies, and brings back enough artifacts to decorate a dozen museums. He even finds the Rosetta Stone, though at the time, everyone's more excited about his battle reports than his archaeology. But the war turns. The British sink his fleet at the Battle of the Nile. He's stranded. People whisper that he's finished. Then he comes back. Just shows up in France. In 1799, he returns from Egypt like nothing happened, smiling, confident, as if the Mediterranean's just a big moat around his future empire. And somehow, within weeks, the Directory collapses. There's a coup. They call it the 18th Brumaire because apparently normal calendar dates were too mainstream for revolutionary France. You don't know all the details, but it's quick, bloodless, legal-ish, and suddenly, Bonaparte is first consul. Not king, not yet, but close. You stand in the street and read the news, printed in neat type, a new constitution, a stronger republic, a new era begins. You look around and realize people aren't panicking. They're relieved. After a decade of revolution, blood, famine, and fear, most people just want someone to take charge. Even if it means the republic isn't quite what it used to be. Even if it means trading one master for another. You go home, sit at your rickety table, and stare at the flame of a single candle. You remember where it all started. The Bastille, the bread lines, the hopes. Now there's stability, order, leadership. But liberty? You're not sure anymore. Still, you keep the candle burning, just in case the revolution decides to wake up again. Chapter 9. You don't need a calendar to know the Republic is fading. You can feel it in the air. The streets are quieter, not because there's peace, but because people are holding their breath. The tricolor flags still wave from balconies, but now they hang a little stiffly, more decoration than defiance. You notice the slogans are gone from the walls, or painted over. Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité replaced by marble busts of Napoleon. Excuse me, Bonaparte, staring down with that cold, unreadable half-smile. The first consul is everywhere now. He hasn't called himself emperor yet, but the title's hovering, waiting in the wings like an understudy dressed in gold. You read the papers, he's reorganizing the laws, building new schools, fixing the economy, balancing the budget. Even your cousin in Lyon, the one who used to drink absinthe for breakfast, says, well, at least the trains run on time. There are no trains yet. That's not the point. The point is that Bonaparte has become the revolution's final form, a man who promises order after chaos, dignity after blood, glory after humiliation. And you're not sure where you fit anymore. You still remember the Bastille, the bread riots, the crowds storming the palace gates, that thunder in your chest when the monarchy crumbled. You remember what it felt like to believe the world could be reborn. But now you live in an apartment with plaster cracks and a strange smell. You coo for soap. You trade whispers about arrests. You still call your neighbors citizen, but it's more habit than conviction. And yet, something in you still resists. So when the plebiscite comes, the vote to make Napoleon consul for life, you hesitate. You get a ballot, read it slowly. It's phrased like a question, but feels like an ultimatum. Do you approve the new constitution which places Bonaparte as first consul for life? You want to scribble something in the margins, maybe. Wasn't this about not having kings? But in the end, you vote yes. Why? Because everyone else does. Because soldiers stand near the polling station, not saying anything, just present. Because your cousin says, he's better than the chaos. Because deep down, you're tired of watching dreams die. Quirky historical note? The results come back with laughably high approval, over 99%. Historians still debate how many were real votes, how many were forged, and how many were made by people just like you, too scared or tired to say no. In 1804, it becomes official. Napoleon crowns himself Emperor of the French. Not crowned by the Pope, no, that would imply the Church had power over him. He takes the crown and places it on his own head, in front of the world, like a man declaring, "This time, I'm in charge, and I'll stay that way." You watch it in a tavern. They pass around an illustration of the ceremony at Notre Dame. Everyone squints at the little sketch of Napoleon holding the crown, and someone murmurs, "Did we really go through all that, for this?" No one answers. Because what are you going to say? That the revolution succeeded in some ways? Sure. Feudalism is dead. The nobles don't get first dibs on everything. Your nephew goes to school now, something unthinkable under the old regime. There are laws, clear ones, even if they're enforced unevenly. But is this what you fought for? You're not so sure. Paris changes again. The guillotine is stored away. The tricolor remains, but it now waves above marble arches with Napoleon's victories etched in stone. You hear about new wars, Austerlitz, Ulm, Jena. You recognize none of those names. They just mean one thing, more bodies. Bonaparte becomes Napoleon I. His face is on coins. His family becomes nobility. The revolution's child has grown into a monarch, tailored to modern tastes. More maps, fewer wigs. And you? You age. Your joints hurt in winter. You walk slower. Your musket sits in a corner, gathering dust. You sometimes sit in the square where the guillotine once stood and wonder if any of it mattered. You meet a young man one evening, bright-eyed, loud, idealistic. He talks about liberty, about people's rights, about pushing back against tyranny. He reminds you of yourself, until he mentions something reckless, a pamphlet, protest, a plan. You grip his arm and say, careful. He grins. What, afraid of the police? You don't answer. You just look at him. Because you remember the whispers, the knocks at night, the blood on cobblestones. You remember Danton, Robespierre, even Marat's soaking in his bathtub of fury. He doesn't understand yet. You envy him for that. But you also fear for him. Still, you admire the fire in his chest. Because no matter how many regimes rise and fall, how many generals crown themselves kings, there's always someone ready to fight again, to believe. Historians still argue whether the French Revolution ever truly ended. Some say it died with Robespierre. Others say it lived on in Napoleon's reforms. A few claim it never ended at all, that every revolution since carries its blood and breath. You're not sure. But late at night, you light a candle and place it on your windowsill. Just one. You do it every year, on the anniversary of the Bastille. No one notices it anymore, but it reminds you of who you were, and what the world could be. Chapter 10. You wake up one morning feeling the weight of years pressing down on you, heavier than any musket or cannonball ever could. The world around you has changed so much, you barely recognize it. But inside, some part of you still clings to the hope that all the sacrifice, every shouted slogan, every stolen loaf of bread, every lost friend, meant something. Napoleon's empire stretches far beyond Paris now. His armies march across Europe, redrawing maps with every battle. You hear whispers that the old monarchies are crumbling or hiding in exile or plotting. The continent is a chessboard, and Napoleon is the player who refuses to let go of the queen. You try to keep track of the news. Not easy when newspapers are censored and rumors are weaponized. But one story keeps coming back, the Egyptian campaign. That same campaign that once felt like a distant curiosity has now morphed into legend. The Rosetta Stone, the pyramids, the desert marches, Napoleon's adventures have become part of French folklore. You imagine what it must be like to stand beneath those ancient stones, far from the bloodied streets of Paris, dreaming of empire and eternity. It's a stark contrast to the cramped room where you eat your modest meals, the cold drafts slipping in through cracked windows, the faint scent of smoke and mildew. In the taverns, the conversation turns to politics less and less. Instead, people talk about fortunes made, the latest fashion from the salons, the exotic tales of distant lands. You hear that some nobles have been pardoned, some even welcomed back. The revolution's old enemies seem to be creeping back into society, disguised in new clothes and quieter voices. It unsettles you. The dream you once had, the dream of a society built on justice and equality, feels more fragile with every passing day. It's like watching a sandcastle dissolve as the tide creeps in, relentless and indifferent. You start to notice something else. Fear is no longer just about the guillotine or the terror. Now it's about the loss of identity, the slow erasure of what you believed in. You see it in the eyes of your neighbors, in the cautious smiles, the silences that fill the spaces where passionate debates used to roar. But still, life goes on. Your niece, who was just a child when the revolution began, is now a young woman. It's a strange thing, this feeling you get when you think back to the French Revolution. You know it was an important time, one of those historical moments that shake the world in ways people still talk about, still study, still argue over. But when you really sit with it, deep in the night when all is quiet, you can't help but wonder, could you have survived it? Would you have made it through the chaos, the bloodshed, the betrayal? Would you have been a revolutionary hero or just another nameless space, lost to history? The truth is, you probably wouldn't have survived. Let's be real for a moment. The revolution wasn't about playing nice or sitting around and discussing philosophies. No, it was messy, brutal even. There were betrayals in every corner of Paris, and the rules of survival changed as quickly as the wind. The streets that once echoed with cries of liberté, égalité, fraternité soon became rivers of blood. The guillotine wasn't just a tool of justice. It was a symbol of how quickly hope can turn into despair, how fragile even the loftiest of ideals can become when the pressure of revolution pushes them too far. There were no middle grounds. You were either in, or you were a traitor. And maybe, just maybe, if you'd been alive then, you wouldn't have been part of that idealistic wave that fought for liberty. Maybe you would have been like most people, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, standing in the crowd, not shouting Vive la République, but quietly trying to survive, wondering how long it would be before someone came for you. What's even more terrifying than the mobs and bloodshed? The constant fear. One moment you're at a street corner, arguing over the price of bread, and the next you could be dragged off to the guillotine for being a suspect. No one was safe, not the aristocrats, not the merchants, not even the commoners. You could be denounced by anyone, even your own family or friends. Trust disappeared faster than a loaf of bread on a starving day. And even if you were lucky enough to avoid the terror, imagine this: the entire city is on edge. News spreads like wildfire. Someone's been arrested, someone's been executed, and you can't even trust your own reflection anymore. The revolution had a way of turning people into strangers to each other. Friends became enemies. Everyone had something to lose. Even the revolutionaries themselves were torn apart by their own ideals. The guillotine loomed over everything. Even if you weren't caught in the frenzy of the reign of terror, you could feel the shadow of it. But it wasn't all bloodshed. There were moments of beauty in the chaos, like the birth of the metric system, a quirky but oddly fitting symbol of the revolution's quest for reason. Can you imagine trying to buy bread using peas or livers? The old ways were confusing, arbitrary, and filled with the privilege of the elite. The metric system, however, was a standardized way to measure things, a small victory for reason and logic in the middle of madness. And yet, you still wonder, how much did the revolution change? Historians argue whether the ideals were truly realized or whether the chaos allowed for a new form of tyranny, Napoleon. Was he a continuation of the revolution's goals, or a betrayal of everything it stood for? Some say the empire was a natural outgrowth of the revolution's chaos. Others say Napoleon stomped out the very spirit of liberty. But in your heart, you know the answer. The revolution was both the triumph of hope and the birth of fear. One chilly evening, you wander along the Seine, the city lights shimmering like memories in the water. You pass the spot where the Place de la Révolution once stood, where the guillotine had ruled over so many, where the air was thick with fear and the ground soaked in blood. Now it's peaceful, quiet. The iron scaffold is gone, replaced with trees and statues. You stop and close your eyes. For a moment, the weight of the past is almost too much to bear. But then, the wind brushes against your face and you remember. The revolution wasn't just about bloodshed. It was about something deeper, something more fragile. The possibility that people can shape their own future, that they can change the world if they try hard enough. You smile softly to yourself. Maybe you wouldn't survive the French Revolution. But then again, you wouldn't have wanted to. Not because of the terror, not because of the bloodshed, but because you know something now. You wouldn't want to live in a world where the fight for freedom had never been fought. Imagine this. It's the middle of the day in ancient Athens, and you find yourself sitting in the middle of a bustling marketplace, a little bit hungry, a little bit tired, and a lot curious. A group of philosophers has gathered nearby. Some are dressed in humble robes, while others sport a bit more flair, perhaps a toga or two. Chapter 11. You might think that after a decade or more of chaos, of blood and thunder, of hope dashed and reborn, things would finally settle down. Maybe, just maybe, you could start living without that nagging feeling in your gut, without the constant urge to look over your shoulder. But the truth? The revolution never really lets go. It's like a shadow that clings to the very air, a ghost haunting the cobblestones of Paris. Even after all these years, you can hear its whispers in the wind, feel its presence in every decision, every change, every moment. Napoleon has crowned himself emperor, and at first his rise seems like the inevitable conclusion to the chaos. The man who once wore the hat of a general now dons a crown of imperial power. It's the sort of spectacle you might expect from someone so relentlessly ambitious. For a while, it feels like the storm has finally calmed, like the whirlwind of revolution has given birth to something solid, something enduring. Napoleon has brought stability to a fractured France, at least on the surface. Yet even the most unshakable empires have cracks. And Napoleon's empire? Well, those cracks are starting to show. You start to notice the signs, the tension in the air, the cracks in the facade, the undercurrent of discontent. The wars that had fueled Napoleon's rise aren't slowing down. If anything, they're only intensifying. The endless campaigns stretch French soldiers across Europe and beyond, their bodies worn, their spirits frayed. The tales of glory are still told, sure, but they're tempered by stories of exhaustion, of men broken not just by battle, but by years of conflict. In Paris, you'd hear whispers of Napoleon's ill-fated Russian campaign in 1812. Ah, the Russian campaign. A venture so grand, so audacious, it almost feels like a tale spun from myth. Napoleon's ambition knows no bounds. He dreams of conquering Russia, of stretching his empire across the vast expanse of Europe. It's a mission so bold, so incredible, that at first it sounds like something from a storybook. But like many stories, this one takes a darker turn. Imagine yourself among those soldiers, frozen and starving, fighting not just the Russian army, but the biting cold, the endless snow crunching beneath your boots, the vacant, abandoned villages that stand as a cruel reminder of the harshness of war. The further they march, the more distant the hope becomes. The promise of glory grows dimmer with each passing mile. Supplies run out. Soldiers fall ill from frostbite, hunger, exhaustion. Some die on the spot, while others cling to life for just a little longer. Napoleon's grand campaign into Russia ends in a disaster, a catastrophe that reshapes the course of history. Thousands of soldiers die, not just from battle, but from the elements, from disease, from despair. You hear the stories of those who barely made it back to France, haunted, hollow-eyed men who have witnessed the worst that history can offer. Historians still debate whether it was hubris or simply bad luck that led to the campaign's collapse. But regardless of the cause, the toll it takes on both France and Napoleon is undeniable. The man who seemed so invincible is now faltering, his empire showing the first signs of crumbling. And you can't help but feel a pang of sympathy for those who fought and died in that frozen wasteland. These were just men, after all, men who had once believed in Napoleon's vision, only to see it end in ruin. Back home in Paris, the streets are still alive with the bustle of change, but there's a weariness now, a feeling that the revolution, in whatever form it takes, hasn't truly ended. Paris is still in transition, still holding on to the fractured ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The young idealists you meet in cafes share their dreams of a better future, but their words are tinged with exhaustion. They speak of liberty, of justice, of a France where all men are truly free. But you can hear it in their voices. They're tired. They've lived through war, through politics that twist on themselves like a snake, through broken promises and empty hopes. You share a drink with them, listen to their arguments, their frustrations, their hopes, and in their voices you hear something that's still alive, still fighting for a place in the world. The spirit of the revolution. It's not gone. It hasn't died. It's just evolved, like a seed that sprouted in new soil, reaching for a different kind of future. The revolution, in all its forms, isn't over. It's just waiting for the next chapter, for the next wave of change, for the next generation to carry the flame. But amid the chaos, there's a quirky tidbit that catches your attention. Napoleon, for all his faults, wasn't just a conqueror. He was also a reformer. His greatest legacy might not lie in his military conquests, but in the Napoleonic Code, the legal framework that he established. The code reorganized the chaotic French legal system, making it clearer, more uniform, more rational, and oddly enough, it became the foundation for modern civil rights in much of the world. It's strange to think about it, but here's Napoleon, the man who crowned himself emperor, helping to lay down a legal framework that would shape societies long after his reign had ended. It makes you wonder, what would you have done if you had lived in this time? Would you have been swept up in Napoleon's charisma, supporting him as he marched toward an empire that promised stability? Or would you have been one of those who resisted, seeking to preserve the ideals of the revolution in their purest form? As you wander through the streets of Paris, you see soldiers marching back from a campaign, their faces gaunt but still proud. They sing a haunting song as they pass by, a melody that carries both loss and hope in every note. The sound sends a chill down your spine, and for a moment, the city around you feels suspended in time, a place where memory and the present blur into something you can almost touch. it dawns on you that surviving the French Revolution isn't just about avoiding the guillotine or ducking away from the crowds. It's about carrying that story forward, through the wars, through the peace, through the decades and centuries to come. The revolution might have begun in the streets of Paris, but its echo will carry on long after you're gone, resonating in the hopes and struggles of future generations. History isn't a neat, tidy ending. No, it's a river, winding and unpredictable, always changing course, always adapting. And here you are, floating along with it, trying to hold on, trying to find your place in the current, even as the world around you keeps shifting. The revolution is always there, quiet now, maybe, but still waiting for its next spark, its next chapter, its next voice. Maybe yours, maybe not. But you'll keep living it, day by day, year by year, as history continues to unfold. Because after all, the revolution never truly lets go. Chapter 12. The calendar flips again, like the turning of a page in a long and tumultuous book. And there you are, standing on the edge of a world that's neither the monarchy of old nor the dream of the revolution fully realized. The empire, once a towering symbol of Napoleon's grandeur, now shows cracks, splinters under the weight of its own ambition. The man who once seemed invincible, unstoppable, is beginning to feel the strain. His empire, built on conquest and glory, is crumbling under the pressure. You can feel the tension in the air. It's palpable, like the stillness before a storm. The unease creeps in, soft and slow, but undeniable. There's a growing resistance, coalitions of nations banding together, determined to take down the man who has changed Europe forever. England, Austria, Russia, the old powers, tired of Napoleon's conquest, have set their armies in motion, prepared to push back and redraw the borders of Europe once more. They are tired of war, tired of the emperor's vision of Europe shaped by his hand. And you feel like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something that you can't quite name. The familiar sounds of daily life in Paris seem off-key now. Even the people on the streets, the merchants, the workers, the soldiers, they all seem to be moving under the weight of something unspoken. Their faces are lined with weariness, and their eyes are weary with anticipation. Napoleon's wars have taken a toll. The common people, those who never stood on a battlefield, who only paid the price in blood and coin, are starting to question the cost of glory. Taxes are high, and the wars that once seemed like the path to greatness are now just another source of suffering. The stories of young men marching off to fight, barely out of their teens, are a constant hum in the background of life. Some return, yes, but many don't. Your own neighbor's son, with his eager smile and youthful determination, marches off to join the Grande Armée. You can't help but wonder, will you ever see him again? Will any of them return? Nationalism is on the rise, but not the kind Napoleon had hoped for. No, the seeds of the revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, are sprouting in places far from the French borders, among the conquered peoples who once bowed to Napoleon's might. The revolution's ideals are spreading, but in unexpected ways, ways that might challenge Napoleon's very throne. The idea of self-rule, of national identity, takes root in Spain, in Italy, in the German states, anywhere Napoleon's empire stretches. The very ideals that once sparked the revolution now ignite fires in lands far beyond France. But those fires? They aren't burning for the emperor's glory. They're burning for freedom from his rule. In Paris, the signs of this growing unease are clear. Napoleon's court, once a vibrant symbol of revolutionary ambition, has grown grander, more elaborate, and far more disconnected from the people it was meant to serve. The once thriving streets now feel distant from the pomp of the emperor's triumphs. The city sparkles with new monuments, triumphal arches, and statues glorifying the emperor's conquests. And yet, underneath the glittering surface, there's a sense of quiet, creeping disillusionment. You wonder, was Napoleon truly the fulfillment of the revolution's dreams, or was he its ultimate betrayal? Historians still argue over the question, debating whether Napoleon was the last revolutionary or the first emperor of a new oppressive age. The truth? It's elusive, a question that's too vast to be answered in a single breath. Even you, a survivor of the revolution, are unsure where the line between victory and defeat lies. Napoleon's ambitions seem like both the ultimate realization of the revolution's ideals and the clearest sign of their undoing. You wonder if history will ever settle the question, or if it will remain as muddled and murky as the waters of the Seine. One evening you find yourself walking past the Tuileries Palace, where Napoleon now resides. Guards stand in neat rows, their faces cold and blank, their eyes distant. The air feels different here, thick with the weight of history. but also with something darker. You remember when the Tuileries was a place of upheaval, when revolutionaries stormed its gates, when the people's fury boiled over and changed the course of history. Now those memories feel like a distant echo, a ghost story told to children. The revolution seems so far away now, almost as if it never happened at all. The image of the young king, Louis XVI, his hesitant steps into the future, is fading into the past. You walk to the river, drawn by the sound of the flowing Seine. You sit on a bench by the water's edge, lost in thought. The river carries so many stories, so many lives, some forgotten, others yet to be told. As you sit there, you're joined by an old friend, someone you haven't seen in years. You talk about the good old days, about the battles fought, the hopes, the fears, and the broken promises of the past. Your conversation meanders like the river itself, moving from memory to regret, to hope, and then back to uncertainty. Your friend leans in, his voice lower as though afraid someone might overhear. "Do you think it's all worth it?" he asks, the question hanging in the air. The blood, the sacrifice, the years of war, what was it all for? You hesitate, unsure how to answer. The question presses on your chest like a stone. Your mind races through the years, the bloodshed, the violence, the promises of liberty. The faces of the fallen flash in your mind, the men and women who gave everything for the dream of a better world. Finally you speak, the words coming slowly, like an old truth trying to make itself known. "I don't know," you say quietly, "but I think it has to be. Because if it wasn't, then what's left? What do we have to hold on to?" The river flows on, relentless as it has for centuries. Forgiving, yet unforgiving. Unpredictable, yet constant. Like history itself, it doesn't stop. It doesn't wait for answers. It just keeps moving, pulling everything along with it, toward the unknown. You can hear the sound of laughter in the distance, the soft murmur of life carrying on. Paris hasn't forgotten the revolution. It hasn't forgotten the sacrifices. The echoes of the past are still there, lurking beneath the surface. And yet the city continues, the people continue, as if they found a way to survive. Not just the revolution, but all the revolutions that have come before and the ones yet to come. And so you continue too. You continue to live, to question, to struggle. Because the fight for liberty, equality, and fraternity is never truly over. It's only paused, waiting for the next spark, the next generation to take up the cause. For now, though, you rest, watching the Seine flow, carrying the weight of history, while you hold on to the fragile hope that someday, somehow, it will all make sense. And with that, the river continues to flow. Chapter 13. Winter wraps Paris in a heady gray blanket, suffocating the streets beneath a chill that bites deep into your skin. The cold seeps through your clothes and into your bones, turning the world around you into a blur of muted colors and swirling fog. You notice the way people move now, faster, more purposefully, shoulders hunched, heads down, eyes wary. The lively hum of the city has quieted, and the streets no longer echo with laughter or revolutionary cries. Instead, there are cautious whispers, hurried footsteps, and the occasional clink of carts' wheels on the frozen cobblestones. The mood is heady, like a storm cloud hanging just above the rooftops. You can feel it in your bones, as if Paris herself senses what's to come. The city, so used to upheaval, is bracing for yet another blow. The year is 1814. The once mighty Empire of Napoleon, a force that reshaped Europe, is now crumbling under the weight of its own ambitions. In the distance, you hear the faint rumble of thunder, but not the kind that signals a storm in the sky. No, this thunder is different. It's the sound of the Allied armies marching across the countryside, closing in on Paris like a wave building before it crashes onto the shore. The coalitions that had once seemed too vast to be anything but theoretical are now a real, tangible force, pressing hard from all sides. Their armies move closer each day, pushing French troops back step by step, inch by inch, toward the very heart of the empire. You can only imagine the tension inside the walls of Paris, the frantic councils, the hastily scribbled dispatches sent from one corner of the city to the next, and the whispers of fear that fill the air. You think of the soldiers you once knew, now scattered across the European battlefield, some fallen, some missing, and wonder if this is really the end of it all, the end of an era that has felt so inevitable, so unstoppable. Could it really be over? And then the news comes. It seems to arrive like a quiet rumble at first, barely audible, before it swells into the inevitable announcement. The Allies have entered Paris. Napoleon, the great conqueror, the man who crowned himself emperor, who rewrote the map of Europe, is forced to abdicate. It's almost surreal. You can hardly wrap your mind around it. The man who reshaped the world with a single glance, who brought empires to their knees, is undone not by a single glorious battle, but by the relentless pressure of too many fronts. The armies of Europe, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Britain had cornered him like a wild animal, and now the mighty Napoleon is no more than a figurehead, a fading dream. As you walk through the streets of Paris, you notice the city, for the first time in years, trying to catch its breath. The cheers of some residents ring in your ears, while others stand in mournful silence. Some see this as the end of war, a much-needed peace. Others mourn the loss of a leader who, despite his many flaws, symbolized the strength and order they once believed in. Napoleon, for all his faults, was a force. He brought France out of chaos and reshaped the world in his image. Now, the Bourbons, the old royal family, are being restored to the throne. King Louis XVI returns from exile, stepping back onto a stage that has changed forever. His arrival is greeted with a mix of uncertainty and reluctance. Paris, a city that had lived through the Revolution, the Reign of Terror, and Napoleon's reign, now faces the return of a ghost from the past. A monarch who seemed long gone, but who is now stepping into a world that's been shattered, one piece at a time. You can't help but feel conflicted. On the one hand, there's the longing for peace, for a sense of stability, for the end of constant upheaval. But on the other hand, there's the bitter taste of defeat, the feeling that the revolution's ideals have been swallowed whole by a return to the monarchy. The revolution that began with a storm of fire and fury now feels like a distant memory, a time that's somehow been silenced under the weight of the Bourbons' return. The dreams of liberty, equality, fraternity now seem like faded promises, distant stars in a sky too dark to see. And yet, in the midst of all this, there are small moments, quirky, human moments, that break through the tension. Did you hear about the Russian soldiers? During the occupation of Paris, they became a source of amusement for the locals. The Russian soldiers, their boots clunky and oversized, could barely move through the streets without tripping over themselves. Parisians couldn't help but joke about how the Russian boots were so big they could leave footprints bigger than their heads. It's strange, isn't it? That even in the darkest of times, life finds ways to make fun of itself, to crack a smile amidst the ruin. Historians still argue about the Restoration, about whether it was truly a return to the old ways or a cautious step toward modernity. Did the Bourbons learn anything from the Revolution, or were they simply waiting for the chance to reclaim the throne, to return to the life they once had? Were they more than just a symbol of old power, or were they a necessary step toward something better? As you stand in the cold, leaning against a lamp post, you can't help but wonder, what does it really mean to survive? To endure. To live in the shadow of giants, shaped by their mistakes, their triumphs, and their dreams. It's not enough just to live through history, to pass through the tumult and violence of war. No, surviving is about carrying the weight of it all, the lessons of the past, the hope of the future, and the countless stories of those who have come before you. And you realize something in that quiet moment. Survival isn't just about escaping the storm. It's about holding on to the pieces that make us who we are. You have lived through wars, through betrayals, through broken promises. You've watched the rise and fall of empires, the ebb and flow of power, and now you're standing at the precipice of a new world. And though you can't predict what comes next, you know that the world is forever changed. A time when the world was broken and reborn is ending, and yet, in that ending, you see the beginnings of something new. Perhaps it's not the grand revolution you dreamed of, but it's something that will carry the lessons of the past into the future. Something that will remind future generations of the cost of ambition, the price of revolution, and the fragile nature of freedom. And with that, you take a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill your lungs. You turn back toward your home, knowing that no matter what comes next, you have survived. The weight of history rests on your shoulders, but so does the promise of tomorrow. Chapter 14. The city breathes a fragile new rhythm under the Bourbon Restoration. Paris looks much the same. Its winding streets, its stone facades, its towering spires, and bustling marketplaces. But something has shifted beneath the surface. The wild fire of the Revolution, once so fierce and consuming, has smoldered now, leaving only embers and ash. In its aftermath, the city is quieter, less certain, and yet, new tensions stir beneath the weight of its history. You wander through the familiar labyrinth of cafes and salons, places where the old aristocracy now sip their wine with the same cautious elegance, their laughter guarded and hollow. They speak in low tones, as if aware of the fragile peace they're walking on. Across the room, former revolutionaries sit silently, their eyes sharp, their voices low, quick to catch the smallest hint of dissent. The ghosts of the past mingle with the hopes of the future, like shadows in a half-lit room. You can feel it, like a tightrope, stretched thin between old enemies, the weight of history pulling both sides closer to an inevitable confrontation. In the salons, the aristocrats smile tightly at their victory, but you see the flicker of fear in their eyes when the conversation turns to the past. They sip their wine a little faster, trying to fill the silence with something, anything, but you can hear it. The beating heart of a revolution that refuses to be buried. They don't say it aloud, but you know they're always waiting for the next moment to come, for the next radical spark to ignite a new fire. After all, France has always been a place of great passions, of soaring ideals that burn bright and then fade away in the blink of an eye. The tension is palpable, an undercurrent of unease that you feel every time you step out onto the streets. Despite the semblance of calm, the revolution's ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity still whisper to the restless among you. Those words, once shouted from the rooftops, are now quietly passed from ear to ear in dark corners of taverns and in shadowed alleys. The old guard may have returned to their thrones, but the memory of the guillotine's blade lingers, sharp, cold, and ever-present. A reminder that nothing in France lasts forever, and that tides of revolution can turn in an instant. You hear rumors of political trials, of journalists and poets dragged away in the night for daring to write words deemed dangerous. The monarchy may have been restored, but in its wake, a new kind of censorship tightens its grip. You can feel it in the air, like a low hum beneath the city's usual clamor. The revolution may have officially ended, but the battle between progress and reaction is far from over. It plays out in the conversations you overhear in the cafes, the uneasy silence that falls when someone speaks too openly about the past. One evening, you meet a man in a quiet tavern. He's older now, his face lined with the memories of wars fought and lost, but his eyes still burn with a fierce fire. He fought in the Revolutionary Wars, and his words are full of the passion that once lit the streets of Paris. He speaks of a France free from tyranny, any tyranny, he insists. It doesn't matter if it's a king or an emperor or a general. It's the tyranny that must be destroyed. You listen, feeling the weight of his words, knowing that for many, the revolution never truly ended. It's just been waiting, evolving, changing, lying dormant, waiting for the next spark to ignite it. The man's voice cracks with emotion as he speaks of the dream of a nation free from the chains of oppression, and you can see that, even after all this time, the fire in him hasn't gone out. You nod, agreeing with him, though part of you knows that nothing is ever so simple. The world doesn't work in black and white, no matter how desperately we want it to. And then, of course, there's Napoleon. His shadow still looms long and dark, even in his exile on Elba. You hear tales of his escape, of his brief return to France during the 100 Days, and you know the country is still divided. There are those who long for his return, who see him as the embodiment of the revolution's spirit, a man who brought order to chaos, who marched across Europe with a fierce sense of purpose. And then there are those who curse his name, who believe he betrayed the very ideals he once fought for. The Battle of Waterloo marks the final chapter of his rule, the end of a tumultuous era, but his legacy remains tangled, alive in the hearts of many. You can hear his name spoken with reverence in some circles, and with bitterness in others. Napoleon's fall may have been inevitable, but for many, it's a wound that refuses to heal. His name continues to divide, a reminder of how far France has come, and how much further it still has to go. A quirky historical tidbit? Did you know that the revolutionary calendar, introduced during the Revolution as a bold experiment in rationalism, was abandoned during the Restoration? It's one of those strange, little details that gets lost in the big picture. The calendar had weeks made up of 10 days, months named after seasons and weather, and the year began on the autumnal equinox. Can you imagine trying to plan a dinner party or schedule a trip to the countryside with that system? How many people found themselves 3 days off on a meeting date? Historians still debate whether it was a grand attempt at rationalism or simply an overly complicated nuisance. You reflect on what survival really means now. It's not just about avoiding death or defeat. It's about navigating a world that is constantly reshaping itself. The tides of history continue to ebb and flow, and you find yourself caught between the past and the future, between the fire of revolution and the slow creep of reaction. There's a certain art to surviving in times like these, a delicate balance between hope and pragmatism, between holding on to what's worth fighting for and learning when to let go. As you stand on a quiet hill one evening, gazing out over the city, the lights of Paris twinkle like distant stars in the night sky. The revolution's fire may have dimmed, but it's never fully gone out. There are embers still glowing, waiting for the wind to catch them and bring them back to life. And perhaps that's the point, because revolutions are never truly finished. They are part of the ongoing story of people, a nation, a world. They flicker and fade, but they never quite vanish. The future is always a bit like the embers of a fire, unpredictable, restless, and full of potential. You turn away from the hill, your heart heavier with the knowledge of what has come before and what is yet to come. You have survived through the revolutions of the past, but the question remains, how will you survive the revolutions of the future? Chapter 15. Years pass like whispered secrets, and you find yourself growing older. The weight of time settles into your bones, and your memories, once sharp and vivid, are now like delicate threads woven into the vast tapestry of history. The revolution, once a roaring tempest of passion and fury, has softened into stories told beside flickering fires, in classrooms filled with eager minds, and in hushed conversations over glasses of wine, the edges of which are now worn smooth by the passing of many hands. But though the storm has quieted, the lessons of those years cling to you like the last chilled winter, lingering in the corners of your thoughts, persistent and unavoidable. They are strange companions, discomforting, yet oddly comforting at the same time. You know you will never escape them, nor would you want to. They are the very pulse of the world you have lived in, and perhaps they always will be. The world around you has changed in ways both grand and subtle. France is no longer the land of kings and nobles, but a nation grappling with citizenship, justice, and the meaning of its identity. The revolution has fractured the old world, reshaping it into something new and uncertain. Its once wildfire has now smoldered into a quiet, persistent glow, a glow that still flickers, even if no longer with the intensity it once had. You've watched as modern democracy begins to take root, slowly at first, then more surely. The horizon seems alive with the sparks of change, though the path ahead is anything but smooth. The road is uncertain and, at times, treacherous, full of obstacles and moments of doubt. But the flame of democracy, once kindled in the streets of Paris, has spread far beyond its borders, lighting up the world in ways the revolutionaries could only have dreamed of. Yet even as you witness the winds of change sweeping across the globe, you sit quietly in your room, the fading light casting long shadows against the walls. You reflect on all that has come before, on the lives lost and saved, on the ideals that were both shattered and rebuilt in the fires of revolution. The revolution, you realize, was never a clean story of good versus evil. It was messy, contradictory, and deeply human, like life itself. And in that mess, in that contradiction, there is beauty and truth. You see now that surviving the French Revolution wasn't just about dodging the guillotine or surviving the political upheaval. It was about holding on to hope amid the chaos. It was about understanding that change is never easy, often painful, but always necessary. Hope, like the revolution itself, is born out of struggle, a flicker that refuses to be extinguished no matter how dark the world becomes. Quirky tidbit. One of the most enduring legacies of the revolution was the birth of the modern citizen. Before this time, people were subjects of kings, of emperors, of empires. The very word citizen began to appear more frequently, marking a radical shift in how people saw themselves and their roles in society. The idea that individuals were no longer subjects to be ruled, but active participants in a nation, was a profound change that would ripple through history. Historians still argue whether the French Revolution was a victory for democracy, or whether it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of radical change. Was it a beacon of hope for future generations, or a disaster that went too far, too fast? Perhaps in the end, it was both, a flash of brilliance quickly dimming into the shadows of its own excesses. A moment of perfect clarity, followed by confusion and darkness. As you close your eyes now, you can't help but picture the streets of Paris once again, the cries, the cheers, the hushed silences after the storm. You see the faces of those who fought, who dreamed, who survived. Some were crushed by the weight of history, others rose to lead. Yet all of them were part of something far larger than themselves, a force that reshaped not just a nation, but the world. You realize as you sit in quiet reflection that you too are part of that legacy. You who lived through the chaos, who witnessed the tumult of the streets and the shift of empires, are part of the story that never quite ends. Though you may not have wielded a blade or a banner, you were there. You have carried those years with you in your bones, in your heart, in the stories you tell to those who listen. And in those stories, the revolution lives on. You wouldn't survive the French Revolution if it happened today, you know that. The world has changed too much, but perhaps that is its greatest triumph. The world, for all its flaws, has moved forward, and you have lived to see it, to witness its slow, painful evolution. The revolutionaries, their fire now long extinguished, may be gone, but their ideas, their dreams, still shape the world. And that, perhaps, is the greatest survival of all. It isn't about escaping the guillotine or avoiding the bloodshed of war. It isn't even about seeing the end of the revolution. It's about living through its legacy, and knowing that, in some way, we are all still part of it. The revolution, with all its faults and grandeur, didn't die with the final gasp of Napoleon or the fall of the monarchy. It lives in the lives we lead, in the decisions we make, and in the stories we pass on. In that sense, the revolution is far from over. It's still being fought, every day, in the hearts of those who dare to believe in the possibility of a better world. And you, perhaps, are still part of that fight. The soft glow of candlelight flickers as your eyelids grow heavy. The restless streets of history slowly fade, replaced by the gentle hush of night. Remember, the past is never far, but here now you are safe, wrapped in the quiet warmth of this moment. Breathe deeply. Let the weight of centuries drift away like autumn leaves on a gentle breeze. Tomorrow, the world will continue its endless turning, but tonight, let peace find you. Rest easy, traveler. You've journeyed far through time and trial. The dawn will come, steady and sure. Good night and sweet dreams.